que se expandió como una pandemia. O sea, empezó a haber gente muerta por aquí, por allá.
It really becomes the wild, wild west, and I think you see that in Indian country here in Montana.
The Chapitos pioneered the manufacture and trafficking of the deadliest drug our country has ever faced. And they are responsible for the massive influx of fentanyl into the United States.
Have you ever wondered how a single drug can devastate entire communities almost overnight? Just take a look at how the Sinaloa Cartel infiltrated Native American reservations, exploiting their vulnerabilities to spread the world's most dangerous drug, fentanyl, a drug that's 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine.
I've heard of people overdosing the first time they ever do it.
In this video, we'll be uncovering the shocking reality of how these ruthless operations are tearing apart families and wiping out entire generations. Why are these remote communities perfect targets? What can be done to stop this epidemic?
It's as if is raining on our reservation.
Stay tuned to discover personal stories of heartbreak, survival, and the urgent need for solutions. The fight against fentanyl is far from over, so let's dive right in and see what this whole ordeal is about. Let's talk about something truly concerning that's been happening across Native American reservations, right here in the US. You see, they've been dealing with some pretty tough social and economic issues for years. But now, they're facing the biggest crisis of them all, and that's fentanyl. This powerful opioid that's mostly trafficked by the famous Sinaloa Cartel is now hitting these communities hard. We're talking rising addiction rates, tragic overdoses, and major disruptions in society. Take the Blackfeet Reservation in northern Montana, for example. This place is known for its absolutely stunning natural beauty, with amazing landscapes that are sure to take your breath away. But right now, fentanyl is what's really ruining this entire community.
They've basically set up shop. It's just a problem that won't go away. It's as if fentanyl is raining on our reservation.
Can you imagine? In just 1 week, they had 17 overdoses and 4 deaths, which in turn led to the tribe to declaring a state of emergency. And what's more, this isn't just an isolated case. Many other reservations are facing similar crises brought about by this devastating drug. So what's law enforcement doing about all this? Well, both federal and local authorities seem to be caught off guard, to say the least.
These reservations don't have enough tribal police to protect them. Very, very few, and there's hundreds and hundreds of acres of land. And nefarious people, the ones that are committing crimes, know this.
The resources are just not there, and it's exactly this issue that now allows the cartels to operate with very little interference from just about anyone, and they're taking full advantage of every weakness in the system. Why do you think the Sinaloa Cartel finds Native American reservations such easy targets? It's not just because they're so geographically isolated. It's also due to some deep socioeconomic struggles that traffickers waste no time exploiting. That, along with a historical neglect of these communities, makes for the perfect recipe for disaster. Because, in case you didn't know, these communities have been continually underfunded and marginalized, making them especially vulnerable to threats like drug trafficking. And as for the Sinaloa Cartel, which was once led by El Chapo, well, they're now cleverly targeting these vulnerable reservations. And, make no mistake about it, they see the potential for huge profits. And that's not even the worst part. They're also infiltrating the very fibers of Native American society, very often through social ties like marriage.
They've infiltrated our reservation. They've married in.
Yes, you heard that right. Nothing is sacred to these violent cartel gangs, not even marriage. This, in turn, makes their activities almost invisible to outsiders like you or me. And, to make matters even worse, high unemployment, lack of educational opportunities, and limited healthcare access make drug trafficking seem like a way out for some of these people. After all, it's a quick escape from poverty, even though it's incredibly risky. And, needless to say, the cartels are exploiting these vulnerabilities as much as they can. And when you take into account the fact that the federal government's response has been slow and inadequate, things get even more depressing. Why are these reservations, which are now known hotspots for drug trafficking, left to deal with this crisis on their own? Where's the coordinated effort from federal agencies? It seems to be tangled in bureaucratic red tape and a complete lack of political will. These are just some of the tough questions that really need answering if we want to see real change. And I'm sure you're wondering, why fentanyl? Well, we need to make one thing clear from the get-go. This is one of the worst drugs that have ever struck the market. If you want to understand how we got here, it's crucial that we first have to dive deep into what fentanyl does, and, even more importantly, how it even reached the US in the first place.
Next to the fentanyl crisis wreaking havoc in communities across the country, the overdoses, drug seizures, and concerns continue to grow from coast to coast. But some experts tell us before we try to get a sense of just how bad things could get, we need to explore how this all began.
All right, let's get into how and why fentanyl has become such a huge issue to begin with. How could a drug that was originally made to help people who were dealing with severe pain turn into the golden standard in the illegal drug trade? But then, once you look at some stats, things really start to make sense. Think about this. Fentanyl is 50 to 100 times stronger than morphine. You know morphine, right? It's a pretty powerful drug to begin with. But when we talk about fentanyl, the main difference is that just a tiny bit of it can be deadly.
Muy malas experiencias y es una sustancia que por el simple hecho de tu tomarla con tus manos es algo que es dañino, pues. Te pone, te hace el infecto, te hace efecto, pues.
It's often sold as pills or mixed with other drugs, so accidental overdoses are much more likely. But why the switch from natural opiates like heroin to synthetic ones like fentanyl? It's just simple economics, really. You see, fentanyl is cheaper to make and even easier to transport, and because it's so potent, even a small amount can make huge profits. Imagine a single kilogram of fentanyl costing just a few $1,000s to produce, but being capable of generating millions in retail sales. This massive profit margin is exactly why cartels like Sinaloa are all over it. They mix it with heroin or press it into fake prescription pills, which makes it easy to sell and, sadly, impossible for its users to recognize. It's really a nightmare scenario for governments everywhere. Cartels are maximizing their profit while also cutting down their production costs. And the impact is nationwide. Just look at San Diego, for instance. The streets are full of tents where homeless people live, and many of them are hooked on fentanyl. Take David, a 32-year-old who's been on the streets for over a year, and the amounts he is consuming?
Like 3 times a day. Right now, I mean, I don't have enough money to smoke as much as I would, really. I would smoke more, but...
He's even seen people overdosing.
I hate seeing that, but it's, you know, somebody laying down, not breathing.
So, how does fentanyl get here? Well, curiously, it all starts in China, where the base chemicals are made. These chemicals are then shipped to Mexico, where cartels like Sinaloa process them into fentanyl in their many secret labs. But they're not your average, barely minimum scrabby labs. Quite the contrary. These state-of-the-art labs use some pretty advanced techniques to make high-purity fentanyl.
I will say it again and again, if we do not focus on these cartels, get ready. Get ready. If we continue to attack the symptoms of everything you and I've talked about, drug trafficking, weapons trafficking, money laundering, this adjustment from smuggling to the trafficking of people, domestically, yes, we have to challenge that. But if you don't go after who the problem is, which is these cartels, and crush their labs, you're just seeing the beginning. Because we are one economy of them, one. It's not a US-Mexico issue, like you're always told in the news by these so-called experts.
That being said, once the fentanyl is ready, it's then packaged and smuggled right into the US. Not to mention, they're using all sorts of clever methods to dodge law enforcement.
It's very serious, and the tribal councils have a legit beef. And what do I mean by that? It's not only Sinaloa Cartel that's coming up, it's also CJNG, Nueva Generación Cartel, is taking full advantage.
It's mind-blowing how a drug meant to relieve extreme pain has been turned into a weapon. cartels have figured out how to exploit fentanyl's potential for devastation. And, looking at how fentanyl moves from production to distribution, we've got to ask ourselves, how did things get this bad? How did our systems, which are supposed to protect us, become so easy to exploit? Well, when you think about it, the fentanyl crisis exposes some serious flaws in our systems. Why weren't we better prepared for something like this? Was it the sheer power of the cartels, our lack of resources, or something else? And why is the federal response so slow? It's really frustrating to see. What's even scarier is how deeply the cartels have reached into vulnerable communities. They exploit just about any weakness, socioeconomic despair, high unemployment, and lack of education and healthcare. And, as we've seen in so many cases, people see drug trafficking as a way out of poverty, which makes this whole ordeal very difficult to tackle head-on. But don't think that it's just the homeless or the desperately poor who are being affected. Make no mistake about it, fentanyl is everywhere. It's in the counterfeit pills that look like prescription drugs. It's mixed with heroin and other street drugs, very often without users knowing. So what does this mean? Well, the fact that fentanyl's presence is so hard to spot has turned the entire drug scene into one very deadly minefield.
Que se expandió como una pandemia. O sea, empezó a haber gente muerta por aquí, por allá.
I've heard of people overdosing the first time they would do it.
So how do we fix this? It's a massive problem that needs a lot of coordinated effort. We need better law enforcement resources, more public awareness, and serious political will to tackle the cartels head-on. We also need to address the root causes that make communities vulnerable to this kind of exploitation. That means investing in things like education, healthcare, and job opportunities to give people some real alternatives.
We need to start communicating more about the dangers of drugs also to the younger generation. We need to start talking about what fentanyl is, what meth is, what all these other drugs are, and we need to start planting those seeds at a younger age so that they'll start growing up and they get to say no to drugs.
In the end, reflecting on the fentanyl crisis makes you realize just how connected these issues really are. It's not just about stopping a drug. It's about fixing a broken system and helping people rebuild their lives. That being said, the fight against fentanyl is part of a larger battle for justice and community support. And now that we have a better understanding of what the current fentanyl crisis is all about, it's time to really get into how this has been affecting the Native American reservations. They're being hit the hardest right now, so please be warned that some of the details we're going to be exploring are pretty hard to stomach. We can start off by looking no further than the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. They had just 19 police officers 2 years ago. Just imagine 19 police officers in charge of protecting all of that land. But now, they're even fewer. How can a handful of officers possibly keep up with sophisticated drug cartels like Sinaloa?
Tell me what happens at night.
It's like a switch turns off and there's a whole different population takes over.
Traffickers thrive in these conditions, using the vast, remote areas to their advantage. They set up shop in secluded homes, making it hard for anyone to track them down. And by marrying into the local population, cartel members blend right in, gaining trust, and then exploiting it. It's like a twisted game of hide and seek, but the stakes here are deadly serious. The tactics these cartels use are wild. They'll create fake emergencies to distract police and clear their smuggling routes. It's a constant cat-and-mouse game, and without enough law enforcement, the cats are seriously outnumbered. You'd think there'd be more federal support, but nope. After all, with less than 20 DEA agents cover the whole state of Montana, how can they possibly keep up? And it's not just the law enforcement gap. Economic despair plays a huge role. High unemployment, poor education opportunities, and rampant poverty leave people feeling hopeless. Cartels exploit this by offering money and drugs, pulling people into a vicious cycle of addiction. It can get really heartbreaking.
They actually sell the drugs to these individuals and gets them more addicted.
How do you say no to what often feels like your only way out? So what's being done? Well, not nearly enough. Federal officials acknowledge the problem, but resources are scarce and coordination is poor.
And so they are preying on these individuals on the reservation. They're taking full advantage of the lack of law enforcement, the lack of BIA officers or agents, and they're taking advantage of the fact that we don't have enough drug enforcement special agents with boots on the ground here in the state of Montana.
So, these communities are basically left to fend for themselves against a well-organized criminal network. And this all makes you wonder, what are the long-term strategies? Temporary fixes just won't cut it. How do we provide these communities with real, sustainable solutions? How do we break the cycle of exploitation and give people real hope and opportunity? There's got to be a clever approach. Boosting law enforcement presence is crucial, but so is improving economic conditions. Stuff like job training programs, better education, and accessible healthcare could make a huge difference. We need to address the root causes of why these communities are so vulnerable in the first place, and we need to do it fast. And let's not forget the human element. This isn't just about policies and enforcement, it's about real people's lives. Every person struggling with addiction, every family torn apart by this crisis, they deserve more than just survival. They deserve a chance to thrive. And it's easy to get discouraged when you take a look at the human toll that fentanyl has. Remember, these aren't just statistics on a webpage. They're real people with hopes and dreams, and they're getting hit the hardest.
I just think people need to be aware that, your child doesn't have to be a, drug user in order for this to, take their life. They can literally try it once. And from what I understand, my daughter didn't even consume an entire pill, and she's no longer here.
And can you imagine what it must be like for health professionals dealing with this crisis daily? Take Alan, a Red Cross team leader in Tijuana.
¿Cómo se llama?
Fernando.
Fernando. ¿Qué pasó, Fernando?
He's overwhelmed, treating multiple overdose victims each day. Many of these people didn't even know they had taken fentanyl, and it's likely that they thought it was something else. Now, let's talk about Native American reservations. The situation there is even worse. Imagine being a parent on a reservation, feeling helpless as you watch your child fall into addiction. Resources for treatment are scarce, and traffickers seem to be everywhere, preying on the most vulnerable. Schools and community centers are also completely overwhelmed, and trying to keep up with the surge in addiction is always an uphill battle. And, what's more, the psychological toll is massive too. Depression, anxiety, and trauma are everywhere. These communities already deal with intergenerational trauma, and now, fentanyl is making things worse.
The drug problem on our reservation, it's so serious that it's pretty much wiping out a generation.
Elders, who are the keepers of cultural knowledge, are witnessing their communities fall apart. And instead of passing down traditions and wisdom, they're watching the younger generation get trapped in a cycle of addiction and despair. So, what's the way out? Is there hope for these communities to reclaim their potential and rebuild? That's a very tough question, but the answer might lie in a well-planned and long-term approach. Don't get it twisted. Immediate interventions are crucial. Things like providing full addiction treatments and tons of mental health support. But we really need to think long-term here. So how do we do that? By creating economic opportunities and restoring cultural pride. Jobs and a sense of belonging might just be what is needed here. But how can we do this when we have narco gangs knocking on our door? They're here, and their number one priority is to carry out their operations with as little interference as possible. Well, in order to stop them, we must first dive into exactly how they operate and see why stopping them is so tricky. And it's not just that it's tricky, it's also incredibly dangerous. Let's talk about the Sinaloa Cartel and the mess that they're currently causing with fentanyl. It's not just about addiction. It's about tearing communities apart piece by piece. Picture this: a once vibrant town now struggling to survive under the weight of a drug epidemic. It's a nightmare. First up, the healthcare system. Virtually all the local clinics and hospitals are completely swamped with overdose cases. Doctors and nurses are working around the clock, but they just don't have enough resources. So, people in need of urgent help are often left waiting, and the whole system is buckling under the pressure. It's like a healthcare crisis within a drug crisis. Pretty horrible, right? Then, there's the schools. Kids, who should be gearing up to become future leaders, are battling addiction instead. Attendance is dropping, grades are slipping, and teachers are fighting an uphill battle to keep these kids on track. It's heartbreaking to see so much potential being wasted because of the cartel's influence.
Unfortunately, when we don't have the boots on the ground and people aren't being held accountable, it really becomes the Wild Wild West. And I think you see that in Indian country here in Montana, more than we should.
Economically, the situation is just as bad. Addiction leads to job losses, which means that families are struggling to make ends meet. Small businesses are closing down because theft and other crimes are on the rise, and there's less money flowing through the local economy. Think about a village that used to thrive and is now basically turned into a ghost town. It's like a scene from a dystopian movie, but this is the harsh reality that these towns are facing.
Why Montana?
Fundamentally, it's money. It's big business. These are transnational criminal organizations. They're sophisticated people who have a lot of resources and who are as dangerous as they come.
And, needless to say, the social fabric is unraveling too. Families are being torn apart as parents lose children to addiction, siblings watch each other waste away, and grandparents are stepping in to raise kids because their parents are simply too busy doing drugs. Obviously, the emotional toll is huge. Grief and loss are just about everywhere. And as if that wasn't enough, the constant threat of cartel violence creates an environment of fear and mistrust. People are scared to even seek help because they're afraid of becoming easy targets. This fear only helps to deepen the overall sense of isolation and hopelessness felt by so many here.
So we do have a serious problem here, and it's time that DC starts waking up and starts giving us the resources that are needed in order to help our reservations.
But how do we stop the Sinaloa Cartel from destroying these communities? It seems like rebuilding everything from the ground up is going to take a massive amount of effort. It's about providing support and resources, yes, but also about restoring hope and trust. However, all of this is easier said than done, because these cartels aren't just going to go down without a fight. And wait until you hear all about how they operate. Let's just say it's pretty shocking.
And what they are doing is that they're setting up stash locations in surrounding states. And so what they'll do is they'll bring up large amount of drugs, stash them in one location, and then they'll transport them or have them transported to these reservations in the closeness of darkness in each reservations throughout the state of Montana. So we do have a serious problem here, and it's time that DC starts waking up and starts giving us the resources that are needed in order to help our reservations.
As I'm sure you know, the Sinaloa Cartel is a massive drug trafficking organization that's changed its game a lot over the years. They started with marijuana and heroin, but then they switched to synthetic drugs like meth and fentanyl.
The Chapitos pioneered the manufacture and trafficking of the deadliest drug our country has ever faced. And they are responsible for the massive influx of fentanyl into the United States.
But why the switch? Because synthetic drugs are way cheaper and easier to produce, and they make a ton more money from them. Think about this. Making synthetic drugs doesn't need big fields of crops or lots of workers. Just some chemicals and a lab. Pretty efficient, right? That's exactly why the cartel loves fentanyl. Add the fact that just a small quantity can go a long way, and you've got yourself a bestseller. And the cartel has people working all sorts of jobs. There are chemists in secret labs making the fentanyl, which is dangerous work with all those toxic chemicals. Then, there are the transporters who move the drugs north, using all kinds of sneaky methods to get past border security. Ever heard of drug tunnels? Yeah, they use those too.
Since 1990, Border Patrol agents have discovered at least 230 cross-border tunnels running from Mexico into California and Arizona. They've seized loads of cocaine, methamphetamines, and marijuana inside them.
We've been around here before, shown you some incredibly sophisticated tunnels, but nothing quite like the one we are about to show you. For one thing, it has its own rail network. For another, when the San Diego Joint Tunnel Task Force located it, they also nabbed 8 people and more than 20 tons. That's 20 tons of pot.
And even when law enforcement, like Victor, catch some of these shipments, it's just a drop in the bucket.
Marcaje positivo. Estos aseguramientos son muy frecuentes. Actualmente se realizan de 2 a 3 operativos por semana y en la mayoría de las ocasiones son positivos.
One of the cartel's big strengths is how fast they adapt. If law enforcement cracks down on one route, they're going to just find another. They also mix fentanyl with other drugs like cocaine and heroin to spread it further and make more money. It's like they're always one step ahead. And how do they keep all that money hidden? They launder it through legitimate businesses. That's how.
Ponen sus empresas, tienen empleados. Uno que yo hago este negocito poquito. ¿Cómo voy a pagar si es poquito lo que hago? ¿Verdad?
But let's not forget the actual people behind all this. They got into the cartel life young in hopes of making some quick cash.
Sin darme cuenta, yo me encargaba de la empaquetación, elaborar el empaquete para poder extraditarlo de Culiacán a Estados Unidos. En su momento son cosas que, pues a través de eso.
But why do people join the cartel? Well, sometimes it's because there aren't many other options.
Pero sí también hay mucha fuente de empleo por ellos, oiga. Mucha gente trabaja con ellos porque tienen con qué pagar.
You see, legal jobs are scarce, and the money from the cartel is quick and extremely tempting. It's a tough situation, and many end up regretting their choices. And I know this all seems pretty hopeless and scary, but there's a silver lining in this after all. So, what can we do about all this? It's not just about catching the bad guys. We need to hit their money sources, improve border security, and work together internationally. But we also need to tackle the root causes. Why people turn to the cartel in the first place. Without giving people better options and addressing these deeper issues, we'll always be caught up in this vicious cycle of crime. Tackling the fentanyl crisis on Native American reservations needs more than just law enforcement. We need more officers and better surveillance, but that's only part of the solution. Community engagement and education are crucial. Raising awareness about fentanyl's dangers and offering youth programs can help build resilience against addiction. And healthcare services also need a big boost, especially addiction treatment and mental health support. More accessible rehab centers are essential. Economic development is a long-term fix. Investing in local businesses, infrastructure, and education can reduce the lure of quick drug money and weaken the cartel's influence. Tribal leaders, like Marvin Weatherwax Jr., call for stronger federal support, better healthcare facilities, and more trained officers. Cultural revitalization can also combat despair by fostering community pride and identity. We've now seen how this powerful drug devastates lives, tears apart families, and cripples entire communities. But awareness is the first step toward action. Share this video to amplify these voices and stories. Together, we can advocate for better resources, stronger law enforcement, and comprehensive support for affected communities. After all, the fight against this epidemic requires all of us. Also, feel free to share your own thoughts on the matter with us in the comment section below. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed our video, then please give it a thumbs up and make sure to hit that subscribe button so you can always keep updated on all things cartel. Until next time, stay safe.